Frequency domain analysis is a method of studying the behavior of a variable at different frequencies or time scales. It can help us understand how inflation responds to different types of shocks in the economy. One type of shock is a commodity price shock, which is a sudden change in the price of a raw material or energy source. Commodity price shocks can affect inflation in both the short term and the long term, depending on how persistent they are and how they affect other variables such as output, wages, and expectations. To illustrate how frequency domain analysis can help us identify the effects of commodity price shocks on inflation, let us consider two examples. The first example is the oil price shock of 1973 to 1974, which was caused by an embargo imposed by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, on some major oil importing countries. This shock was a large and unexpected increase in the price of oil, which had a significant impact on inflation in the short term. However, as the shock faded and the economy adjusted, inflation returned to its pre-shock level in the long term. This means that the oil price shock had a high frequency or transitory effect on inflation. The second example is the commodity price boom of 2003 to 2008, which was driven by strong global demand and supply constraints for many commodities such as metals, grains, and oil. This shock was a gradual and persistent increase in the prices of many commodities, which had a moderate impact on inflation in the short term. However, as the shock persisted and affected other variables such as output, wages, and expectations, inflation rose to a higher level in the long term. This means that the commodity price boom had a low frequency or permanent effect on inflation. Frequency domain analysis can help us distinguish between these two types of effects by decomposing inflation into different frequency components and examining how they relate to commodity price shocks. For example, one study found that there is a positive and significant link between inflation and long-term commodity price shocks, but no significant relation between inflation and short-term commodity price shocks. This suggests that commodity prices have a lasting impact on inflation only when they change persistently over time. Frequency domain analysis can also help us understand how monetary policy can respond to different types of commodity price shocks. For example, another study found that in the intermediate run, which includes the business cycle frequency, inflation and unemployment are strongly negatively correlated under a demand shock. This implies that monetary policy can use its conventional tool of adjusting interest rates to stabilize both inflation and unemployment when faced with a demand shock. However, the same study also found that in the very long run, inflation and unemployment are strongly positively correlated under a supply shock. This implies that monetary policy faces a trade-off between stabilizing inflation and unemployment when faced with a supply shock. In conclusion, frequency domain analysis can help us identify the long-term and short-term effects of commodity price shocks on inflation by decomposing inflation into different frequency components and examining how they relate to commodity price shocks. It can also help us understand how monetary policy can respond to different types of shocks by analyzing how inflation and unemployment are correlated at different frequencies. Inflation is a phenomenon that affects different sectors of the economy and different groups of people in various ways. In this section, we will explore how inflation impacts food, energy, health, and income sectors, as well as how it affects consumers, producers, workers, and savers. Food. Food prices are one of the most visible and sensitive indicators of inflation. Food inflation can be caused by factors such as supply shocks, rising demand, higher input costs, and government policies. Food inflation can have significant consequences for both consumers and producers. For consumers, especially low-income households, food inflation can reduce their purchasing power and nutritional intake. For producers, such as farmers and food processors, food inflation can increase their revenues and profits, but also their costs and risks. Energy. Energy prices are another important component of inflation. Energy inflation can be driven by factors such as geopolitical events, environmental issues, market fluctuations, and technological changes. Energy inflation can have diverse effects on different sectors and groups. For example, higher energy prices can increase the production costs for many industries, such as manufacturing and transportation. This can lead to lower output and employment in these sectors. On the other hand, higher energy prices can benefit the energy-producing sectors, such as oil and gas. This can lead to higher income and investment in these sectors. Health. Health prices are also a significant factor of inflation. Health inflation can be influenced by factors such as aging population, rising demand, innovation, regulation, and insurance. Health inflation can have mixed effects on different sectors and groups. For instance, higher health prices can increase the spending and debt for consumers, especially those with chronic or acute conditions. This can reduce their disposable income and savings. However, higher health prices can also increase the income and profits for health providers, such as doctors and hospitals. This can improve their quality and quantity of services. Income. Income is another aspect of inflation that affects different sectors and groups differently. Income inflation refers to the change in nominal wages and salaries over time. Income inflation can be affected by factors such as productivity, bargaining power, expectations, and policies. Income inflation can have various implications for different sectors and groups. For example, higher income inflation can improve the living standards and consumption for workers and households. This can stimulate the demand and growth for many sectors. Conversely, higher income inflation can erode the competitiveness and profitability for businesses and employers. This can dampen the supply and investment for many sectors. In summary, inflation is a complex phenomenon that has different effects on different sectors of the economy and different groups of people. Inflation can create winners and losers depending on how they are exposed to price changes. Inflation can also have feedback effects that can amplify or moderate its impact over time.